Well, our speaker today is Harry Baya. You all know him as the good friend of Fred and Maxine. And Harry is going to be sharing some of his wisdom, ? With us today. Harry?
I hope you all appreciated the cartoon in the program. I had a lot of fun picking that out. It pretty well communicates what I'm trying to say with the title Wisdom ? First thing I want to say is what a gift it is to have someone who's trapped listening to me, to have people to talk to. People I care about, and so it's a gift, and I appreciate it. So, how about this? All of you who were here for my first talk may remember that it went way over time, and people said, "Why didn't you?" I said, "I didn't know how long it was supposed to go." So I'm setting it. It will go off when I think I have about 5 minutes left. So don't get your hopes up when the alarm goes off. You still have 5 minutes. This talk is going to bounce around a bit. Be prepared. My goal today is to convey to you some of the more important aspects of who I am, how I see the world, and who I have become. I am going to do this by presenting a set of insights I think are useful to me in understanding and dealing with this reality, this very strange reality in which I have lived. I think of these insights as the wisdom I have accumulated in the 78 plus years I have been alive. Some of my insights may be primarily personal, related to my goals and the paths I chose in their pursuit. Others may have a broader application. Your assignment today is to consider their relevance to you. I don't think of these insights as beliefs. Rather, they are best guesses, working assumptions based on my experiences. Beliefs versus assumptions. I don't want to believe in anything. I want to replace beliefs with assumptions. Some assumptions have a very high probability of being right. If I drop something, it will fall. That's a very high probability assumption. The idea is that the term belief can refer to something that has become an important part of a person's identity. It's not open to question or discussion. If it's challenged, they will die to defend it. They will kill to defend it. I don't want to hold any idea that way. I may die to defend what I care for, but not what I believe. That freedom is a good thing is an assumption. Sometimes it's useful to hold an assumption. Here comes one of the first insights. Sometimes it's useful to hold an assumption that you don't really think is correct. For example, in trying to make a particular choice, you could assume there is an omniscient, well-meaning being, a God, and then ask, what choice would that being advise you to make? So there's an assumption that I don't hold as true, and yet I find it useful to assume sometimes. I think the first insight is probably, if I have anything to offer, this is the most important one. A message to my sons. At one point, many years ago, I decided to write out some of the notes for my sons, then pre-teens, about what I wanted them to know in case I did not survive to raise and teach those things. I now find that page 3 follows page 1. Aha. Technical difficulties. Teach them such things. I started off with pages of typing. Over time, it got shorter and shorter. Eventually, I pretty much had it down to one thought. It's coming up. Pay attention. Learn from your experience. Of course, it's useful to judge things like who has your best interests in mind, Who's being honest by telling you what they think is so? Who is trying to take advantage of you? Some advice is better than other advice, and you can never be too good at making that distinction. However, all things considered, my advice is that you cannot trust anyone or any source to tell you what is best for you. That includes your parents, friends, and teachers. Be especially wary of advice from any institution, such as a church, an employer, or a government. Their primary goal is their survival, not your well-being. Listen, try to understand, but find out for yourself from experience what works and what does not work for you. Listen to others. Try to understand what they want you to understand. But above all, trust your experience to tell you what works for you. Test everything. Doubt everything. Though you will never figure it all out, you can immerse yourself for life in the process of trying to see more clearly what is so for you. There is a lot of fog. Your job, your mission in life, is to see through the fog as clearly as you can, to do all you can day by day as long as you live to decrease the fog. I told my sons, pay attention and learn. I told them that I had values and goals, and they could look at my life, my choices, and see the result. Where they saw results they wanted, they could learn from my example. Where they saw results they did not want, like their mother choosing to divorce me, they could learn from that. That was the bottom line, the takeaway from my attempt to give them the best advice I could. Now there are a bunch of individual topics. The uniqueness of each individual. Our personalities, our psyches, our values evolve from a kind of tabula rasa we are born with. Each individual mind is the result of a unique evolution that started before we could even think in words. Each individual's utterly unique evolution was influenced by both genetic predispositions and life experiences, nature and nurture. We are each very different from each other. Our minds are still evolving. It follows that insights may be useful to one person, but useless or even harmful to another. A goal for life. I have tried to define some goals for my life. Here is the one I like best. I want my life to be such that I am constantly trying to make choices I would be most satisfied with when I look back on them. Using this perspective, I notice that I have made many mistakes. My intent is to learn from those mistakes in order to make better choices, ones I am satisfied with in the future. What is communication? I once paid to take a one-day workshop on how to get a job. We spent a good part of the morning answering the question, what is communication? There were about 40 of us in the classroom. Anyone could volunteer a definition. The instructor wrote them on a blackboard. Sometimes, with agreement from us, he would simply add a check next to an earlier one. When there were no more volunteers, he told us he hoped we had all learned from this exercise, and said that he always did. However, he would now give us his favorite definition. It was this. Communication is taking responsibility that the message was received and understood. This is whether you are the one giving the message or the one receiving it. Communication is taking responsibility that the message was received and understood. This is so whether you are the one giving the message or the one receiving it. I like that a lot. An important insight this conveys is that delivering a message is only part of communicating. I expect some reaction to this. How to deal with women, 101. Before I share this with you, I want to ask you to please refrain from applauding or throwing anything at me until the end of this talk. I have learned that when a woman has decided to do something or not do something, it is a waste of time to concern myself with the reasons she gives for this choice. Even if her reasons make no sense, are demonstrably illogical or inconsistent, pointing this out will never cause her to change her mind, and worse, is quite likely to enrage her. I have learned that I do not have to understand, much less agree with, the reasons she may give. The important question is, what does she want, regardless of the reasons she may give? Once I know this, the next question is whether I can support her in that choice. Men, on the other hand, are much more likely to have a logical, defendable reason for their choices. If I can show them a blatant logical flaw in their reasoning, they will, often, at least consider the possibility of changing their mind. However, I should point out that we men often make the choice first, and then work very hard to find sound, logical reasons to support that choice. I learned this the hard way. I estimated it took me at least 50, or maybe more than 100, significant confrontations before I figured this out. My interactions with women have greatly improved since I learned this. Except sometimes. I forget. Each life is a story. Years ago, a good friend of mine, Matt Scanlon, told me about a perspective he found useful. I called him last night to review it with him. My version had grown a little away from his, so I'll give you both. Matt said that he found it useful to think that each life can be viewed as a story, a fairly complex story, that has to fit in with a much bigger, much more complex story. He said that though some might think this sounded like predestination and just discovering what had to be so, he did not see it that way. He felt we had a lot more influence on the story, its meaning, its shape. He said one of our jobs in life is to figure out what our story is, and, as much as possible, to figure out how it fits into the bigger story. It's kind of a story that we tell ourselves to help us understand who we are, what we have done, and are doing with our lives. He said it's not so much that we figure it out using logic as it is that we seek the story over time, and the experience gives us a sense of what our story is. He mentioned specifically that it turns out that a big part of his story is his volunteer work in Sing Sing prison. I was part of that for a few years, and it shaped me too. But I only went into the prison and spent time with the prisoners 30 or 40 times. Matt's been doing this for at least 30 years, and he currently goes in twice a week. My version of his perspective had become the following. Life throws at each of us a lot of facts. We have relatively little control about these facts. Things like who our parents are, where we lived growing up, whether we have children, and who they are, how long we live, what strengths and limitations we have. All these are givens. From this, we must make a story. Different authors can use the same set of facts to make different stories. This is especially so if an author chooses to focus on some facts and ignore others. One of the most important tasks in life is to fit those facts into a story. We make up the story, not the facts. We make up how we view things, what we value, what is important. We would like our story to have meaning, to be a good story, one that others would enjoy hearing. Like many good stories, it can have sadness and joy, triumph and failure, pleasure and pain. It's not the facts that make the story a good one, it's the author. We are the author of our lives. What is your story? You're the author. Is it useful to think that you shape your story? You give it meaning by fitting things together in a good story way? Next is try saying yes. One of my mentors was a man named Richard Bryan. We spent a weekend together about 15 years ago. He had developed a set of rules for living. He told me about them and later gave me a printed copy. If I could find it, I could just use it for today's wisdom. I only recall one specific guideline. It took him a while to get me to understand it. I kept asking questions, suggesting examples, and he patiently worked with me to correct my misunderstandings. This is just the outline. For me, it transcends being kind or empathetic. It's more like a force field that can shape the way we deal with others. By the way, I thought I was least able to get this into words, so you're going to have to read between the lines to get this one. Richard said that this guideline had evolved in dealing with people he loved, but that he felt it could be broadened to include everyone he dealt with. The basic idea was that when someone asks for something, asks us to do something, or asks us to give them something, or support them in some goal, we tend to start from the position of, I don't want to do it. Then, he said, we start from that position and think about whether there is a good reason to not say no, like a debt, or an obligation, or a duty, or whatever. Richard said that he realized that this was the way he had lived a good part of his life. Perhaps your mother asked you to clean your room. Perhaps your wife asked you to make the bed. Perhaps a man on the street asked you to give him money. He said he had changed this to start from yes. When his wife asked him to do something, he wanted to start off in his mind by saying yes, and then look to see if there was a good reason why he could not do what was asked. Richard said that though this may indeed have changed what he chose to do on some occasions, that was not really the most important part of this shift. The difference was in why he did things and how he felt about doing them. We spent over an hour discussing this, and I hope I've retained some of the inspiration I felt then. Experiencing life in contrast to thinking in words. I think I got most of this from Est, Erhard's seminar training. I found it useful to distinguish between the direct experience of something, like diving into cold water, or a first kiss, or being slapped. Distinguish between that and the words we use to describe the experience. One of the goals of describing something is to invoke in ourselves or in others some of the original non-verbal experience. Shortly after a strong experience, each time we tell it, we relive it to some extent. One way of getting over a bad experience is to talk about it until the invoked experience is weaker. After I have told the same story many times, I can roll the tape. However, even then, I aim to recall non-verbally as much of the experience as I can. I am aware that I live, for the most part, in a world of words, experiencing most things as the words that describe them rather than the things themselves. For me, it was important to learn how different real experience is from the words in our head. I think I live too much in a world of words. However, I have at least one escape I can turn to: music. Singing, making music, especially making music with others, sharing, harmony, filling in, these things have strong non-verbal components. When I am playing a reasonably complicated banjo arrangement, I can't talk. It's funny, someone will ask me a question and I'll be going, I will tell you soon. Now is a more of a story with a little insight on the end. Quaker meetings and speaking from the heart. I've talked about this before. I regret that to some extent the tape is rolling, but this is about getting deeper than that. In talking about it, I can usually invoke at least a little bit of the original awareness. I was an active member of the Scarsdale Quaker meeting for over 20 years. Every Sunday we would attend a meeting for worship for 1 hour. It was called a silent meeting. Someone stood outside the meeting each week in the role of greeter. The greeter would welcome each person, perhaps with handshakes. People went in and sat down in pews facing toward the center of the room. The meeting usually began with at least 10 to 15 minutes of silence. Eventually, in most meetings, someone would choose to stand up and give a message, and then sit down. Messages were rarely more than a minute or two long. On a typical Sunday, we call them first days, there would be less than 10 messages. Sometimes there were only one or two, or none. Part of the greeter's job was to ask someone entering if they would be willing to end the meeting. If you were a greeter and didn't do that, then you had to end the meeting. Interesting, the first time you were asked to end a meeting, it felt like a big responsibility. You ended the meeting at noon, but not when someone was speaking, by shaking the hand of someone next to you, and then that shake filled the room. I remember hearing a good answer to the question, how do you know whether or not you should give a message? How do you know when it's appropriate? The answer was that you gave a message when you can't not. You'll know. I don't think I spoke for at least a year. After years of this, I began to have some perception of what was going on. When people spoke, they were almost always speaking in a way that was different from everyday life. It wasn't so much what they were talking about, a death, a flower, a memory. It was something to do with where they were coming from. I called it speaking from the heart. Every now and then someone, often someone new to the meeting, would speak and not be coming from that place. Glad I did that. That was okay. If they liked being in the silent meeting and kept coming back, they would learn. I learned how, sometimes, not just in the silent meeting, but other places, to recognize when someone was speaking from the heart. It's not as big a part of my life as it used to be, but it's still there. Recognizing it is a good experience. Being able to do it, at least sometimes, is even better. Harry's corollary. In this life, we are told or taught many guidelines, often called rules, that are supposed to help us. Some of the more common ones are, look before you leap, beware of strangers, he who hesitates is lost. There are hundreds of these. Some of them can be very useful. However, I have learned that it is nearly always useful to add the following to any such guideline, except sometimes. Remember, no matter what the rule is, add, except sometimes. Except sometimes. Exceptions to the rule. Well, I'm going to skip over that a little bit, but basically, I'm a bad speller, and I was taught the rule I before E except after C, and the sound in A in neighbor and way. I was in 4th grade. Boy, did I like that. About a year later, I ran into an exception. I was enraged. They had lied to me. They didn't realize that I'm the type of person you have to say except sometimes. Now, you're probably not all that way, but I am. If somebody tells me something and there's an exception, they should let me know there are exceptions. If they don't, I am liable to be really ticked. That's who I am. That's the discovery. Okay, here are a few more quickies before my time runs out. One of the theories I've come up with is that, you know, when you go by a tree full of birds and you hear all of the chirping and cheeping going on, hundreds of them. I had an experience in Australia where there must have been 500 birds in that tree, and it sounded like I don't know what to call it, but it was really, I think a brain exists there. I think there is intelligence. I think those are neurons speaking to each other. I don't think it's just a sound. That's my theory. Another theory I have is that why is music so important to us? I think in the evolution of the human race, people sang before they talked. Best guess is language started about 40,000 years ago. Although how in the world they would know that, I do not know. But we do know that they were making axe parts 270,000 years ago. So there had to be a time in there somewhere where language came in. I think that during that time they made sounds, and the pattern of the sounds and the rhythm and perhaps, all of those things were a part of the communication. And that's what became music. So music is speaking to us. You can convey fear, anger, hurry, all those things, love. That's why music is there. Survival of the human race. When I was young, I thought my primary goal in life was to help the survival of the human race. And I thought everybody should be. I'm not as worried about it anymore. First of all, I don't know what the odds are, but with the growing technology of destruction, within a few hundred years, a small village will be able to build a nuclear device, maybe sooner. And there are a lot of crazy people out there. So the human race may not survive. It doesn't bother me as much as it used to. I now think that there is intelligence throughout the universe, the billions and billions and billions of planets, many of which are habitable with even our lifestyle. So it will survive. Maybe not us. Here's a couple of quickies. This is a trick I pull on myself, and I encourage you to find tricks to pull on yourself. I wanted to remember always to put on my seatbelt. So I asked the question, when should I put on my seatbelt? And the answer I came up with was, when it's least important. I mean, the obvious answer is always, but that didn't do it for me. When it's least important. Okay, I get in the car. I'm down by the mailbox. I have to drive up to the garage to take the mail up. Do I put on my seatbelt? No. It's really not important. Bing! Off goes the rule. That's when you put the seatbelt on. When it's least important. It happens to work for me. It's a trick I pull on myself. I've told it to other people. They laugh at me and say, that wouldn't work for me. Well, I didn't say it would. You need to find your own tricks. Okay, let's see. I'll give you one more. Accepting failure and dealing with it. Sometimes in life, there's something you wish you could do. Let's say forgive someone for something they've done. You really, really want to be able to forgive them. You go to therapy, you go to EST, you go to whatever. Every time you go to a workshop when they said, what do you want to work on? I'm going to do forgiveness, you know. And let's say you don't get too far. Let's say you just are stuck. What do? Well, there are two parts to this. One is, don't give up. You will continue trying. I encourage you to forever. But, here's the second part, and this is tricky, subtly. Forgive yourself for failing. You can feel guilty about the fact that you're still not giving up. But don't beat yourself up for the fact that you're trying hard and aren't getting anywhere. That's just a whole nother level of guilt. Now you got two levels of guilt. One is you're beating yourself up because you're trying and not getting there. And the second is you still have the guilt. So, okay. I have spared you the history of the universe, the eventuality of artificial intelligence, and all sorts of interesting, fascinating subjects. And I'm now ready to hear any, you can throw things or comment, or you can, if you have some insights you'd like to share, that would be interesting too.